Your attention, masters, mistresses. All systems functional for the Everything Geek podcast.
Hey, this is Rich McDonald, and I play Commander David Mason on Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And you're listening to Everything Geek podcast.
It's James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Plo Koon in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Everything Geek, the podcast.
Hey, it's Leif Gaffert. I played Uncle Ben's killer in The Amazing Spider-Man, and you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast.
Hello, I'm Simon Fisherbecker. You probably know me better as Dorian Moldovar from Doctor Who, or the Fat Friar from Harry Potter. And this is Everything Geek podcast.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot with the Everything Geek podcast.
You're listening to the Everything Geek podcast, bringing you interviews from your favorite films and TV shows every week, and all of the latest news. Here's your host, Ruari Williamson.
Hello everyone, you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast. I'm your host Ruari, and joining me today is a very special guest. We have Agent Benjamin Hartley, best known for playing Harb Binli in Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. He was also a military aviation advisor on World War Z. How are you today, Benjamin?
Very well, thank you, yeah, very good.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
A pleasure to be here.
Now, of course, your backstory is a bit more interesting, compared to some other guests we've had, because you're not actually an actor. You started off originally as a helicopter pilot in the Royal Navy. Obviously, you're an agent now, and you have your own company, Military Film Services. But can you tell us, for our listeners who may not know your background, can you tell us how you became a helicopter pilot in the Navy?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, my interest in flying and aviation was spurred on by the early Star Wars films, and seeing, as a young kid, you see the X-Wing pilots, and something just sits in your brain that just says, this is the coolest thing ever. So the seeds were sown very, very early. But I actually came into flying and joining the Navy quite late. I went through school and university. I ended up studying music production as a postgrad at university, and I wanted to work in recording studios. I played in lots of bands, and my sort of love was in music. But one day I was walking back from the recording studio, and I went past a window that had a helicopter in it, and it was a Royal Navy recruiting office. And something just clicked in my brain, and I went into the recruiting office, and I just said, what have I got to do to fly one of those? And the process started, and my life took a complete right-hand turn, and I went through the training, which is many years of, obviously it's 3 or 4 years of training, before I eventually became a helicopter pilot and an officer in the Royal Navy. And I served for 16 years, so a long time.
Yeah, definitely a long time, but that really is very poetic, isn't it? That you wanted to become a pilot because of Star Wars, and now you've got to be in a Star Wars film. It's very poetic. It is,
yeah. There's the circle was complete. Yes, to say the least. Wearing the we might talk about it later, but obviously wearing the costume and suddenly feeling like my life had come full circle. So I'm sure there's lots of listeners out there that would likewise feel like their life was complete wearing an X-Wing pilot's uniform, but for me, obviously, it had that extra poignancy.
Yeah, definitely. There's still a lot of life left in you, so
yeah,
exactly, I'm not quite sure life is complete just yet.
Yeah, you're right.
Definitely would have felt like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the company you run, that you're an agent for, Military Film Services, the thing you mostly do on it, of course, is booking other ex-military for films like Rogue One and World War Z, which I mentioned. How did you come about in that agency?
Yeah, a colleague of mine, an ex-Royal Marine colleague, and a very good friend, Andrew Buckley. I worked with him towards the end of my career in the Navy. He left and became a location manager, and it was a a phone call from him really that triggered it off. He was working on World War Z at the time. I didn't know it, but he was asking for some advice and help on locating some equipment, a ship basically, and we ended up working together on World War Z on RFA Argus, which was a Royal Fleet auxiliary ship that was very much like an aircraft carrier, and I ended up doing some advising on that as the aviation advisor. So working with the visual effects department, the director himself and the ADs, looking after the flight deck and trying to work out where all the CGI aircraft were going and where all the extras should go. And Andy at that stage was working on locations, and it was around that point that we realised that a lot of the people that were involved dressed as military guys, weren't actually military, and we just thought, we could actually provide the guys that have actually done those jobs for real. And so after World War Z and the work we'd done on that, we then worked on Edge of Tomorrow, which was a brilliant film, a Tom Cruise film, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was a great film. But managed to get a lot of the ex-military guys working on that film, and then it grew from there. So that was, 5 years ago. And we've grown, we've moved from film to film, and eventually ended up at Rogue One.
That's such an interesting story, and of course, with films like those, and there are a lot of military characters in films and TV shows and all that would be actors, and obviously it's not like they just pick up a gun and do whatever with it. Like, they do have to get put through their paces, go through training on how to hold it properly, but there is something more authentic, wouldn't you agree, of military being brought in to do these small roles?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously the cast and then the actors, they receive a lot of specialist training, and again, we can provide that. We've got military advisors and guys that can train cast to do that sort of thing, and in fact I was involved to a certain extent with that with Rogue One. But a lot of the roles that we would be casting are background artists, supporting artists. So they might not be right in the background. They might be quite key to the scene, but they will be. They could be police or bodyguard. They could be henchmen. They could be like Edge of Tomorrow, futuristic type marine soldiers wearing the exoskeleton suits. There could be period dramas. We've worked on BBC ones for Our World War and Our Girl, which were both period pieces, to Kingsman with the Private Army. So a lot of it could be quite key roles. We've also cast people with dialogue and roles like that as well. But a lot of it is, all the stuff that most films have nowadays. There's always, especially the big budget action films, there's always big bangs, there's explosions, there's weapons, there's guns. It might be police guys or CIA tactical assault teams or whatever it might be. There's always a place for what we do in films, which is great, and everyone appreciates the realism and the authenticity they get from having guys that might have actually done it before. Even if we embed a few people like that within the team, you're always going to get on screen that sense of realism, which is fantastic. And aside from that, we're also giving some interesting work for guys that might have just left the armed forces recently. They might still be serving, they might have left recently. They might be looking for a bit of fill-in work and stuff to do before they move careers into civilian life. And so there's a crossover there as well, which is an extra benefit.
Definitely, I think it's really great that there's an agency like yours providing that sort of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the film industry's realised that small niche companies like ours can provide a real, an excellent service, and it's strange that there wasn't really an agency like ours around. So I think we've carved out a niche, and now we're definitely filling a gap, which is great.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of your work on Rogue One, can you tell us how you were originally cast as Harb Binli in the film?
Yeah, well, we were approached to provide a lot of the, obviously being an ex-pilot, and that's known amongst people that might work in the industry as well, that we're asked to provide some specialists. Because again, film like Star Wars, they want to make sure that they're getting absolutely the best of the best. They've got the best crew working on it. They've got the top cast, and it's wonderful that they can, that they're in a position they can do that. So clearly they jumped at the chance of having actual serving or ex-military pilots playing the roles of the pilots in the Yavin base or some of the other scenes, and likewise ground crew who might have worked on actual military aircraft who are playing those sort of tech guys in the base scenes as well. And I'd actually never I'd never been in a film before as this sort of background. I'd done theatre, quite a while ago now. I'm getting on a bit, but I'd done theatre before, and I'd been involved in producing some small and co-producing some small shorts and stuff. So I had a background in it, but I'd never actually put myself in once I'd started the agency. But once we knew that we might be casting or helping with a lot of the X-Wing pilots, I said I've got to put myself forward for it. And a lot of it was luck, really. As it is, you turn up on set, and once I knew that there might be a chance that my character was going to evolve, then clearly I sort of jumped at it, jumped at the chance.
Definitely, and of course, as Harb Binli, you got to wear the iconic Rebel pilot costume, which so many Star Wars fans, would easily be able to remember Rebel pilot costumes because they go way back.
Yeah.
How would you describe the costume that you had to wear for Rogue One for Harb? Was it comfortable, uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean they're very warm actually, and a lot of the time you're spending, especially when you're doing more of the background supporting roles, it's your job to kind of to fill in all the other parts of the film. That if you just saw films, or if you try and imagine what films are like with just the cast in it and no one else, the key cast, it's so empty. And there's such a big part played by all of the background in it, and it might not feel like it for some films with some background that, they're not realizing what a big part they are. But, for the scenes, the scenes don't play a massive part necessarily in Rogue One, but they're there for sure. And it's a long roundabout way of me saying that, you are moving around a lot and you're running around a lot under lights, in sets, and it can get really, really hot, and people don't realize that, the suits, well, firstly, it was amazing to put on the suits, and going through costume was incredible, seeing all of the amazing costumes, fantastic costumes they've got, and putting them on is incredible. But yeah, it's actually quite, other than being just superb and brilliant putting the thing on, it does actually get really, really hot, and people like the Stormtroopers obviously do incredibly well to wear those things for the long hours that films take.
Yeah, definitely, I can imagine. And I think something you said, which really I think was a really great thing to say, is like, if you just, like you were saying, if you just imagine the films basically with only the core cast, it will feel a bit empty.
Oh, you wouldn't, but yeah, you wouldn't, if you picture every scene through a film and erase all of the background, the people in the cafes, at the bar, or walking down the street, or, army guys running around in the back of a training base or something, it's just dead. The film just does not exist, because life isn't two people having a conversation. It's all the world around you, and so there's a lot of great work done by background, and it's always it's never lauded. No one talks about it necessarily as the importance that it is, but it's massive impact. And likewise, those that take the job seriously, there are some superb background artists who do it full time as well, and do an amazing job. So it should be mentioned more, I think.
Definitely, I completely agree with you. Your Rogue One character, Harb Binli, was featured several times in Jyn Erso's big speech scene in the film. What was it like being part of shooting a scene like that?
That scene. Well, there's a couple of things with that scene. Firstly, actually, when you've got these sort of round table scenes where the camera's got to move around or quite organically and get the reactions of everyone standing around the table, it's hard to imagine if you're not in film how hard it is to position everyone, especially the scenery behind and lighting, that kind of thing. Because normally you set up a scene in one direction and you set the lights up in one, pointing in one way, and you shoot that part of the conversation. And then you can switch the whole scene around and shoot it in the other direction. But for something like that round a table, it's incredibly difficult. So it needed lots of days, and actually went through reshoots. As there was lots of talk about the Rogue One reshoots, but a lot of that's just people not quite understanding the filmmaking process. There's always reshoots, a lot of them planned in, a lot of them because, frankly, the stories change slightly, or scenes don't quite go as they plan, or they look at continuity type things and they don't match. And so there's always reshoots on films. That's the first thing. But, there were lots of scenes, there were lots of takes of that scene, and there were reshoots. So it was interesting to see how it was shot, and it was also great because it felt quite a key scene at the time. I think everyone involved in that scene realized the importance of it in terms of the story, and everyone felt the gravitas of the situation with people, the characters talking about this weapon of mass destruction and what could be done about it, and whether they should be surrendering or whether they should be well, it's a pivotal point in the film, really. So it felt like it whilst we were shooting it, but it was fantastic to be in there and amongst all the the lead cast, and I think it was a lot of fun, and a lot of very professional people working on it.
Definitely. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from what I heard before, originally your character was a bit further in the background, and you kept getting pushed further and further forward in the different takes.
Yeah. Well, again, once it was shot once, and you get a lot of the background people who might be able to do a scene, for a week or so, and then 6 months down the line, if it has to get shot, or even a few weeks later, or whatever it might be, you can't necessarily get all the same people. And if you're quite key, if you have been seen in the background as I was in the first time, they really need your face back in again. And sometimes when it's shot, you do kind of get moved around to suit the lights and to fill the gaps that there might be, and it's whether it be main cast getting shuffled around, or people right at the background, or people like myself that have kind of got a character there that's that's you're going to be seen, but you don't know how much you're going to be seen. So yeah, it really was not so much kind of filling a gap. It could just be the fact that I had this amazing costume on, and it just fit how the cinematographer, the director of photography, it's his kind of job a lot of the time to frame, to make things look perfect in the frame. And it might be a case of someone like that saying, actually, we need to fill this gap in between the two people, or the color's not right or something, let's pull them forward. So yeah, I did find myself getting further closer and closer to the action, to the point that I ended up with quite a lot of FaceTime, if you want to say.
Yeah, quite a lot of FaceTime, that's for sure. Yeah. Which you could only be too happy about, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing, it goes in stages. You're just so grateful to be a part of a film like that. And then when you get to put on the costume, you think that's the most amazing moment. And then you walk into the sets. I mean, the guys that work on the production design, the set building, the set decorating, that side of things. I mean, you walk into something like that and you are in the base. I mean, it is. I can't sort of stress enough how incredible it is to see something on that scale when there's not green screen. They decided, or it's my view that they, made that conscious decision to not make it all green screen and CGI, and you've got all these practicals there and these amazing sets that it makes everyone believe it. So, if that becomes the most amazing moment, and then you find you're in a key scene, and then you're almost not thinking about in terms of, am I going to be in it or not, because it's just an amazing experience. But then obviously as soon as the camera starts catching you, or you think you might have a key part in it, then yeah, you are just really excited when you suddenly realize that you're going to be actually in the film.
Definitely. How would you describe your overall experience working with the cast and crew of Rogue One?
Really, really good. There are some very, very talented actors and some lovely people working on the film, and that's from the cast all the way down to the crew, whether it be the costume department, hair and makeup. These the unsung heroes. When you see or when you're involved in a big film, and you're there seeing it from the machinations of it, the workings of it, the behind the scenes stuff. There's a lot of people to be put through catering and all this kind of side of it that you might not. It's not the glamorous side necessarily, but they all do an incredible job, and they were all a great bunch to work with. And then the cast themselves, as I said, just a very talented bunch of people who, you don't necessarily interact or want to interact too much with them, but or shouldn't do, because they're in their characters, but they're all so amiable and friendly, as well as incredibly professional. So it was a really good experience. Great bunch, good team to work with.
That's really great to hear. What would you say were the biggest challenges you faced while working on Rogue One?
Good question. I think, and this is going to sound a bit strange, the hardest thing was to not kind of stare at all of the stuff that you love about Star Wars, because I was a fan. I grew up on it. I was born at the right time. I was born in the early 70s, so I was just the right age when they kind of came out. And when you're immersed in that world, you can't help but just kind of stare in awe. And you shouldn't be, because obviously you should just be playing your character. But there was a point when C-3PO came in on the back of the set, and there's only not much in the film, but he was just there on set, and we just you found yourself sort of stopping and almost like waving in between takes. It's like, stop it. But yeah, the biggest challenge is to not kind of be overawed by the fact that it's such a big film. At the same time, because it was, as I said before, because the set and everything else was so amazing, that you found it quite easy also to be in that world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. I can definitely see why that was challenging, especially with it being, Rogue One. Obviously, The Force Awakens was really big as well, but it is 30 years in the future from the original films. With Rogue One, you could kind of, especially with your scenes in the Yavin base, that's such an iconic location from A New Hope.
Yeah,
you could
absolutely.
You could stare anywhere in the base, and it would be something you'd be familiar with.
Yeah.
And it would just, and that I can see why that would have been distracting for you. So yeah, it's good that you still were able to get through your scenes without being overawed.
Yeah, I think once the camera started rolling on those scenes, you're fine. You just get into it.
Yeah, it's just going with the flow, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and what would you say were your favourite memories from your time working on Rogue One?
My favourite time, definitely without a doubt, is walking into the crowd tent and costume department, where the costume department are, and seeing Star Wars just there, waiting for you to don the outfit, to don the costume, and that's it's a real privilege, and it's a real honour. I know that sounds like I'm overdoing it a bit, but I think anyone listening to this would completely understand how that would be the case. That it is a real honour. Very, very lucky to be part of it, and I think most people who were involved in it, it wasn't wasted on them either. So, for anyone, as I said, anyone listening to it and hearing, how, there are so many people lucky to be involved in, and I think everyone realised it who was working on it. Everyone feels just really privileged and lucky to be part of it, and it's not wasted on us. I'll say that.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of Star Wars fans on the cast and crew, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
My final question for you, Benjamin, do you have any upcoming projects that you would like to talk about?
Well, I do, but I can't talk about them as much as I'd love to. There are lots of projects that we're involved in. On a personal level as well, it's what's really nice actually is it's kind of spurred me to get back into the acting that I used to do when I was younger. So I'm involved in a few projects personally as well. And as far as the company goes, Military Film Services is currently being rebranded as MFS Casting, because we're doing a lot of other, not just military but other casting as well for the industry. So. There's a lot of projects that we're working on with that I would love to talk about, but I can't. So maybe if I'm invited back for another podcast, I can tell you all about those.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's all of my questions for you today, Benjamin. It's been a pleasure talking to you on the podcast.
You too. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hopefully I can talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be my pleasure completely.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have even more to talk about next time.
Yeah.
We've talked about Rogue One a lot.
Certainly will do, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you've got coming up and where you go with your company, of course.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So it was a pleasure talking to you, and we'll do it again soon. Take care. Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Time to wrap up today's show. Make sure to check out our podcast links, check out our website.everythinggeekpodcast.com/egp, check out our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekpodcast, check out our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/user/everythinggeekcast, check us out on Twitter, twitter.com/everythinggeekp. Check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/official-everythinggeekpodcast. Check out our Mixcloud profile, www.mixcloud.com/everythinggeekpodcast. Email us at the following email, everythinggeekpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our companion podcast, Everything Geek Comiccast, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekcomiccast. Make sure to check out the hosts' YouTube channels. Mine is www.youtube.com/user/Serpdus Check out Benjamin Hartley's website, www.militaryfilmservices.com, and check out channel 1138 where we broadcast live from, www.channel1138.com. Geeks out, everyone.
Being in the pilot, my pilot. No, actually, it was my costume. I was like, yeah, I'm playing a pilot. I'm playing a pilot, and I was really excited.
Run through the water, jump off platforms and stuff like that. And this thing was really heavy. Luckily, I was used to that in the army, carrying all that weight and all that. So I was used to it, but it was still difficult. The weight was heavy. Your boots got filled up with water.